Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to Lion's Heart. And in this video, I'm going to be diving into the use of psychedelics and other practices like meditation, yoga, and contemplation solely for the purposes of spiritual awakening. So although these practices and tools have many other uses, this video is going to be specifically about spiritual insights, awakenings, understanding of reality, specifically this. So that's where the focus is going to be. There's going to be a ton of stuff that I won't mention because I really want to keep this video distilled and concise for this particular topic. So what is spiritual awakening? Spiritual awakening is ultimately the realization that you are reality, you are God. This is an infinite stillness, of an infinite emptiness, and there is no separation. You're intricately a part of it. There is a higher consciousness, intelligence to reality. Death is an illusion. This is all an illusion. This is a game. You're not your ego. You're not your separate self. You're actually the embodiment and the container for reality. Like, you're not inside the body, but the body is inside of you. The room that you're in is God manifest. It is all you. It's all mind. It's all consciousness. And this is the basis of spiritual awakening that we're going to be diving into in this video. And another context for this video is that we're speaking about using these tools correctly. So it's not going to be, just willy-nilly using psychedelics or just, meditating 20 minutes every morning, focusing on your breath. This is for serious spiritual practitioners who want to understand reality and their true nature. This is for people who are maybe already pretty far on the path and pretty advanced, or just very curious and know that this is a possibility to understand reality and want to do it correctly and properly. There's a lot of ways to mess this up with meditation and yoga and, of course, obviously psychedelics. And the context of this video is that you are responsible, you are doing it correctly, you're doing it safely with the right dosages or the right practices. Another point is that there is no simple answer to this question. A lot of people want like a black and white answer of, is it psychedelics? Is meditation wasting my time? But there really is no direct one-size-fits-all kind of answer to this question. It's really a matter of figuring out what works for you and not judging other paths or other people for how they're going about their awakening process. And I'd like to lastly mention my credentials on this topic. I've been studying consciousness for about 8 years now, and I've clocked in over 5,000 hours of formal meditation, along with 50 plus psychedelic ceremonies dedicated to awakening. I've worked with masters and teachers and done workshops with enlightened masters and done yoga teacher trainings and spent hours and hours, thousands of hours reading consciousness books, reading material on non-duality, podcasts, videos, YouTube, forums, basically anything that has to do with this topic. I've researched extensively over and over and still do, and have contemplated this material and had insights and experiences and awakenings myself directly through psychedelics and also through just normal yoga and meditation. So I do feel quite confident in speaking about this, although I'm not saying I'm completely done, and there's still a lot for me to learn, and this is really just an opinionative video, but I think it will be very informative for people who are curious about this stuff. And I think the best analogy for the psychedelic path versus the meditative path, which many of you maybe have heard, is this analogy of taking a helicopter up the mountain versus walking up the mountain. And the mountain obviously is enlightenment, it's full realization, it's the full understanding of reality. And when you take a psychedelic, it's like taking this helicopter to the top of the mountain, whereas within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, with something like 5-MeO DMT, you might get a full experience of yourself as God, fully understand reality, fully blasted into the infinite space, the infinite void, and that's it. That's you just got the enlightenment, you just got the answer, you just got the keys of the universe. Versus the meditative path where you're walking up the mountain, right? it's taking decades. It's frustrating. It's boring. You're walking up the mountain, and it takes a lot longer time. All right, so first off, let's talk about the pros of meditative awakening. So using meditation to have an awakening. So first off, one of the pros of meditative awakening is that this is very well documented. It's been written about, spoken about, books have been written, practices have been created around this for thousands of years. Thousands of years we've known these things. And this is it's extremely important for understanding the legitimacy of meditative awakening. And we also have very clear case studies of sages and masters and enlightened people who have reached the top of the mountain just through using meditation or yoga and these things. So this is very, it's proven, and it's documented, and it's been around for a very long time. And so this gives us kind of a legitimacy in using the meditative path. Another positive to the meditative path is that, as I said earlier, it's like you're walking up the mountain, so you're building character, you're building this integrity, you're really understanding every nuance of the path, of your discipline, of your practice, and you're kind of gaining mastery in that level of mind, in that level of consciousness. When you're going in the meditative path, you're growing yourself as a human, in real time, as it's happening, as it's going. So you're really kind of getting this level of mastery that psychedelics don't really give you. When you take a psychedelic, it's coming outside of you, versus meditation, you're kind of creating that from within. You're becoming self-reliant on your connection to consciousness, your insights, your connection to God. So this is a huge benefit of meditation. Another benefit of meditation for awakening is that it clears the mind and it enhances your ability to focus, so that when you are trying to work on awakening practices, contemplation, yoga, things like this, you have a more baseline calm mind. And so it makes it much easier to meditate from there and to focus on what you need to focus on, because you kind of trained your mind to be able to do that. The benefits of meditation are that it's much safer. It's very safe. We kind of know that as you meditate, it's a very low risk of like going insane or having a bad trip or something coming up that you really genuinely can't handle. Most of the time with meditation, you can kind of snap out of it or regulate yourself, and you're not like in it, versus where psychedelics, you're in it. Once you take the psychedelic, that's that. There's no going back, and you kind of have to surrender to that. So that's another benefit of meditation, is that we know it's safe. We know it's reliable. It's much more easy on the system. It's not like you're having these huge, intense, moments of awakening and then down and up and down. So definitely meditation is a more stable path. And lastly, what's good about meditation for spiritual awakening is that it can be done anytime and anywhere. So you can meditate on the bus, you can meditate at the bar, at the club, on the street. Wherever you are, you can be meditating, and this is good for contemplating God in any moment. Now let's talk about the pros of psychedelics for awakening. Obviously, one of the biggest pros of psychedelics is that they can remove the blocks of the ego very quickly and very easily, so that you can be in that awakened state without a lot of work or decades of discipline. So this is definitely a benefit of psychedelics, is that they can just kind of blast you to the top of the mountain, especially with 5-MeO-DMT, and you can be in that God-realized state without all of the work that it would take to naturally get there. Another benefit of psychedelics is that there's this feeling of kind of like a guidance with them. Like you feel held by the psychedelic. There's kind of a universal love component if you're having a good trip, where you're being guided, things are being shown to you. Even though it is all your mind, it's all you. In the ultimate sense, there's still kind of this feeling of there's something you can surrender to, there's something holding you and kind of showing you the way. So psychedelics will show you blind spots that are very difficult to see through meditative practice and yogic practices. You can kind of see people who have been meditating for a long time, and they still are unaware of things about themselves or things about reality that their mind simply on a very deep level is just suppressing or blocking out. And they they will probably go to their deathbed never really seeing these aspects of reality because they weren't open to psychedelics. So psychedelics can really kind of open your mind to new perspectives that it's very difficult to do even through meditation, just because naturally your survival systems are blocking those things out. And psychedelics can kind of get under the hood per se and really open you to different perspectives and show you different parts of your mind that you might have been blind to. Another benefit of psychedelics is that when you come down from the mountain, obviously, like we said earlier, you take the helicopter to the top of the mountain and then you come down. Yes, you're still not going to keep that peak state, right? You imagine you kind of go into universal unconditional love and you come back down, right? The next day you're going to still be, stressing about taxes and traffic and these things. But in the back of your mind, on a kind of a deeper level, like a soul level, you'll still know the universal love was something you experienced, and that is very valuable in and of itself, that you still have that knowledge. It's not exactly an experience, but it's a knowledge of what you are and who you are. Okay, so moving on to some of the cons of trying to awaken through only meditating. One of the cons is that obviously it takes a long time and it's a lot of work and it's a lot of dedication, and truly to awaken through meditation only is you have to be 100% dedicated to this with your life, and it's really a practice in every moment of coming back to who am I, what is reality, what is this. You have to really love it, and you have to honestly be obsessed with it to end up awakening through meditation. Does that mean you have to go into a cave and live in a ashram for your whole life? No, but you just have to really be disciplined and dedicated to this. And in a way, you do surrender your life to it. In a way, you do. If you want to wake up meditative naturally, it's got to be constantly on your mind. Another thing is that the contemplative meditative path can be done wrong. The mind is very hectic. There's a lot of low quality teachings that won't get you to the juice, which is God realization. And you'll spend decades doing the wrong thing, or your mind will be tricking you and you'll just kind of get lost in these alleyways and loops of the mind, to where you're not actually focusing on awakening and you're not really getting much closer to it. Also, the consciousness needed to actually awaken is very powerful and it's very intense and strong. So you have to break through the survival mechanisms of the ego. And that's very difficult to do naturally, which is where psychedelics help. So another con of meditation is that you can just sit there and just run in circles and not really ever break through to the deeper levels of awakening where your ego is completely out of the picture. That's very difficult to do naturally. Another con of meditation and yoga is that you can get lost in the schools and the teachings and the identity of being a spiritual seeker, the identity of being a meditator, and this actually just is more ego. You're not really focusing on what is reality, who am I, what is God. You're more just kind of lost in this identity of being a practitioner, and there's like a pride there that it's not bad. That's not a bad thing. Everybody's got their egos, but if you're getting lost in that, then you're kind of losing. You're keeping your eye off the ball, right? You're not really focused on the prize, which again is God realization and awakening. All right, let's talk about the cons of psychedelic awakening. Obviously, one of the cons is that you always come down. You never keep that peak state, and that's one of the main differences between state and baseline consciousness, is that psychedelics will take you to massive states of awakening, but your baseline consciousness will still pretty much be where it was before. Maybe even worse, sometimes worse. So that's really one of the powers of meditative path, is that it increases your baseline. It takes longer, but you're getting those gains and you're staying there. Whereas psychedelics, it shows you what's possible and then it takes you back down, which can also can be problematic because it can create like this bitterness and this dissatisfaction with life, to where you know what the highest levels possible are, you know what the truth is, your true nature is freedom and love, and then you come back down to being in your ego and you're still kind of in your old patterns and you're angry at the traffic and things like that, And that can actually create, it can be worse. Like you can be more unhappy because now you know what the truth is and what you're capable of, and what is possible to feel like, and you're kind of stuck in your crappy old ways and your victim ways and things like that, and that can be painful in and of itself. Another con of psychedelic awakening is that it can kind of create this like easiness and this kind of false sense of enlightenment, to where because you've tapped into these states through psychedelics, you think that's now like what you are, and you understand it and that's who you are. And you're still very much in your ego, and now your ego has kind of co-opted these awakenings and is using them to kind of pump itself up, and also create a spiritual ego, similar to how we talked about becoming like a meditative identity. You can be this enlightened identity and think that you're like this awakened person, when you've really just only done a couple of trips and had these genuine insights, but that's not where you're at now. Another con of psychedelics is that it can be obviously used as a crutch, right? To not do the real hard spiritual work, the grindy work, the frustrating, boring work of really meditating and getting your baseline state to where you can sit in a room, no substances, just sit in a room with yourself for 6 hours and be happy. You know, I don't care how much psychedelics you've done. That's difficult for everybody, you know? So that's also a con of psychedelics, is that you can just use them as the easy way and avoid doing the hard work of actual spiritual growth. And the last con of psychedelics is that you can just get completely lost in these new age kind of worlds of shamanism, spirits, energy, past lives, God complexes, power animals, basically like all of these, and I have a power animal, there's a lion right there, but I know that it's not really like something outside of me that's a spirit and that it's guiding me. Like the lion for me is more, it's more of a character, it's more of a value, right? Like an ideal that I know that but I'm not like legit like praying to the lion every day, and you know, giving offerings to the lion and these things. Not that that's bad, but that can be, I mean, you're losing track of the prize, God realization. You are the lion, you are the bird, you are the trees. Everything is one, you're all of it. There's no duality. So another kind of trap or con of psychedelics is that you can get lost in these worlds of new agey kind of spirits, shamanism, and it's all dualism, it's all tricks of the mind, games of the mind, and you're not really awakening when you're doing that. I'd like to give some examples of people, real life people, who have both tried the psychedelic and the meditative, or one or the other only, and their takes on these paths. And these are obviously fully realized beings, so some of the wisest people who have lived. So starting off, we got Ken Wilber, and obviously he's deeply awake, deeply enlightened, and he never took them. So he spent a lot of time in meditation, Tibet Buddhism, a lot of time. I think he said something like he spent 5 years just staring at a wall, just contemplating. So he's an example of someone who never used them, but he did get asked the question on this, and what he said was that he thinks that it's possible to find a balance between using psychedelics and, you know, kind of contemplative methods. Next is Swami Shivananda, who's a mystic in India, and he became deeply awakened only through the practice of yoga. So he never touched psychedelics, and he got full God realization. Another is Rupert Spira, who also never touched psychedelics. He says life is already intense enough, and he's very much awake. Ram Dass as well. This is an interesting one because Ram Dass did them in his youth. I mean, he was the biggest psychedelic proponent that was alive in the 60s. And he did a ton of acid, he did a ton of psychedelics, and he tried to use them to fully attain enlightenment, like a permanent enlightenment, and it never really worked for him, no matter how much he did it. I mean, there was a time where he spent, I think it was like 10 days in a house doing like 30 hits of acid a day with some people, And it was always temporary, is what he said. And it actually, like I mentioned earlier, he said it actually became painful because, you know, he would reach these high states and then he'd come back to normal everyday life. And it was just like not unconditional love and not these peak states that he had realized. And it became painful for him and a source of misery. So that's when he went to India and started doing yoga. And there he actually had his full realization and enlightenment into unconditional love and himself as God. And one of the things that he says, or his guru says, is why visit Christ conscious when you can become it? So he's kind of this interesting character in this, where he said, you know, psychedelics can show you things, but they won't ultimately get you there. And you have to do the work to permanently get your state there in the end. And we also have Martin Ball, who is the first real person to have claimed to attain realization. And if you read his books, it's very obvious that he very likely has. And he's one of the first people to say that he legitimately did it through 5-MeO-DMT, and just using that, he attained enlightenment. And he had been doing Zen Buddhism and meditation for maybe like a decade before that. And what he said was that it's just not possible. You can't reach the highest levels of awakening through just, you know, meditating, and it's a waste of time, and the ego is too structured, and you need really something powerful to break down the barriers of the ego. So he's kind of a case for the other side, saying that the psychedelic path is actually the right way, and meditation is wasting time ultimately. We also have Peter Ralston, who is very conscious, and he had enlightenment. He had an enlightenment when he was in his early 20s, so he was awake at a very young age. And he claimed that he did psychedelics, and you know, they show you these amazing things, and these, you know, you can have these amazing experiences, but what he said was that wasn't it. That's not the truth. They don't show you the truth. And he just says, you know, there's something in me that just tells me that that's not it. Like, psychedelics are not the way. The truth, the enlightenment is a permanent thing. It's a state, and psychedelic states come and go. And the permanent state is not something that comes and goes. It's the truth. It's always true. And lastly, we have Ramana Maharshi, who never touched psychedelics, and he went all the way. He's one of the most awake people to live. But obviously not everyone has Ramana Maharshi's spiritual gifts or a level of consciousness. He basically just contemplated on death as a young boy for a couple of days and had this, you know, huge breakthrough. And granted, he supported the breakthrough. So after the breakthrough, he went into the mountains for like 15 years in solitude and Mount Arunachala and meditated in a cave for 15 years. So it's not like, even these gifted people like Ralston, Maharshi, Wilbur, they are gifted for sure, but they also work their asses off. I mean, Wilbur sat in a chair for 5 years staring at a fucking wall, and Maharshi was 15 years in a cave, and Ralston dedicated his life to contemplation and spent hours and hours, 12 hours a day, you know, just contemplating reality. So there really is no point in going into like a victim mindset of they're gifted and I'm not, so I have to use psychedelics. It also requires hard work and dedication, and you can awaken naturally as well. I'd also just like to make some caveats on this point of these people with psychedelics and meditation and awakening. One important thing to mention is that most of these sages and mystics did not have access to 5-MeO-DMT, which, as I mentioned before, is kind of like this ultimate God molecule that gives you a direct experience into, you know, reality and life and God. So Martin Ball is kind of on the forefront of that. He's kind of one of the first people to speak about it and mention it, and really speak about it as a tool for awakening, which is a new technology that, you know, Ramana Maharshi and Ram Dass even didn't have access to. So I think that's worth mentioning. And it's also worth mentioning that I've met people, and there's many people who have done 5-MeO, and they're not awake. And they're maybe even more deluded than ever. And they're, you know, so it's not a foolproof plan. I would say in both of these paths, it's very difficult and unlikely for people to really fully awaken. Less than 1% of the people who try in both paths. So yeah, it's worth mentioning that, you know, that there is new technologies and psychedelics that maybe are more powerful for this kind of work. but also that there's people that have used these technologies and it's not this kind of foolproof, easy thing that it kind of gets presented as. And conversely, I know meditators who, it's the same thing. Like they've been meditating for 20, 30 years and they're still pretty clueless to, a lot of things in reality and awakening in these things. So on both sides, it's really this tricky thing, and takes a lot of diligence and avoidance of traps to really kind of fully break out of the ego. So just to conclude, I'd love to mention, psychedelics and meditation, it's really about your level of discipline and dedication to the practice. I think psychedelics can definitely help. I think there can be a balance made between, your meditative practice and your psychedelic path. And there needs to be, a good amount of time between trips, not just getting lost in just tripping your balls off and then not integrating it and not, meditating on the things that you've realized. I think that's very important, is to balance and integrate these things. And they need to be used with a lot of maturity. Even your meditation practice and your yoga, like you can bullshit around on your meditative cushion or your yoga. I mean, you really have to be focused on what you're doing. And obviously it's the same with psychedelics. They can be very destabilizing and traumatic and difficult. And kind of also in a weird way, they can be so beautiful that they lead you to kind of just become like nihilistic and everything's an illusion and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you really have to be serious about integrating these things and like, what's the end goal? Is it to have like some amazing peak experience trip? Or is it that your daily life is grounded, rooted, and embodied in spirituality? And ultimately, life and meditation, psychedelics, life, they're all the same thing. It's all consciousness. And life is the psychedelic. Life is the ultimate psychedelic. It's the most powerful psychedelic. It's so powerful we don't even know that we're tripping, that this is a hallucination. So, in the end, they really are the same thing, and the same principles apply to a psychedelic trip that apply to life. Let go, open the heart, surrender, love, be strong. These things that come on psychedelic trips, they also apply to, real life and reality as well. So really, you've got to find what works for you. Some people, it's going to be just meditation. Some people, it's going to be mostly psychedelics. And they just won't resonate with meditation. They just won't like yoga. It won't do anything for them, and that's okay. There is, like I said in the beginning of this video, there's no one size fits all. It's really what works for you, but you really have to keep the litmus test of, am I growing? Am I embodying this more in my day-to-day life? Am I feeling more connected in my day-to-day life? Am I lost in this ego? Like, am I attached to the psychedelic path? Am I attached to being a meditator? Lost in this ego? And then really just focusing on the fucking prize, like God realization. You are everything. You are reality. How close are you getting to that? Are you lost in shamanism and plants and and these spirits and these things, like, or are you awake, right? So that's what I'll leave you with. There's tons more on this topic that I'm sure I'll speak about in the future, but wanted to kind of keep this concise and powerful for now. Much love. Keep going. And talk to you guys soon.